I saw them switch the folder. 5 simple words whispered by a little 5-year-old girl. 5 words that would make a billionaire stop dead in his tracks and catch 2 men trying to steal $9 billion of dollars. But here's what breaks my heart and makes this story so incredible. That sweet little girl wasn't even supposed to be there. She was just the cleaning lady's daughter, sitting real quiet in a corner, trying not to be noticed. And those 2 men in their fancy suits? They never even looked at her. They thought nobody was watching them do their dirty work. Boy, were they wrong about that. This is the true story of how the tiniest voice in that big building became the most important one. How one honest child saved thousands of families from losing everything. And how one whispered truth turned everything upside down. Not just for that company, but for one rich man who had forgotten how to really see people around him. Stay right here with me, because what happens next will remind you why speaking up matters. Even when you're scared, even when you're small, even when nobody thinks you're important. Sometimes being brave is the most powerful thing anyone can do. This is Emma's story, and it starts in the most unexpected place you can imagine. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you're here, please hit that subscribe button and tell me what you think about this story in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from, too. Let me tell you a story that will make you believe again in the power of telling the truth. It's about a little girl named Emma, just 5 years old, who changed the life of one of the richest men in the whole world. And she did it with just one simple sentence that changed everything. Emma Harper sat perfectly still in the corner of the 42nd floor hallway, her small legs tucked beneath her bright yellow dress. The marble floors stretched endlessly in every direction, cold and gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. She clutched her coloring book tightly, trying to make herself invisible while her mother Grace worked nearby. The soft swish of cleaning supplies, the only sound breaking the corporate silence. The Richardson Global Tower felt like a giant glass castle to Emma, all sharp edges and reflective surfaces that made everything look twice as big and twice as scary. She had learned to be quiet here, to sit in corners, and wait patiently until her mother finished cleaning the important people's offices. The building hummed with a constant electrical buzz, and Emma could see the city lights twinkling far below through the floor-to-ceiling windows that made her stomach flutter when she looked down. Grace Harper moved efficiently from office to office, her movements practiced and purposeful. She had been cleaning these floors for 3 years now, working the night shift while Emma slept at her sister's house. But today was different. Emma's babysitter had called in sick, and Grace couldn't afford to miss work. Not when the rent was due in 5 days, and her bank account showed exactly $47.32. The executive conference room stood at the end of the hallway, its double doors closed and its interior dark. Grace had already finished cleaning it an hour earlier, emptying wastebaskets and wiping down the massive mahogany table where million-dollar deals were made daily. The room smelled like expensive leather and coffee, a stark contrast to the antiseptic scent that followed Grace everywhere she worked. Emma watched 2 men in expensive suits walk past her without a glance. Trevor Banks wore a navy suit that probably cost more than her mother made in 3 months, his silver hair perfectly styled and his shoes clicking authoritatively against the marble. Daniel Pierce walked beside him, younger but equally polished, carrying a folder with a distinctive red stripe across the top. Emma had seen that folder before during her previous visits, always in important people's hands, always treated like it contained something precious. The men disappeared into an office 3 doors down from the conference room, their voices becoming muffled whispers. Emma returned her attention to her coloring book, carefully staying within the lines of a butterfly drawing, while her mother's vacuum hummed in the distance. She had learned that staying quiet and invisible was the safest way to be in this towering world of glass and steel. 20 minutes later, The office door opened again. Trevor Banks emerged first, glancing around the hallway with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. His gaze passed over Emma without pause, as if she were just another piece of furniture, insignificant and temporary. Daniel Pierce followed, no longer carrying the red-striped folder. They walked toward the conference room with purposeful steps, their conversation hushed but urgent. Emma couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the tension in their voices, the way adults sounded when they were doing something they shouldn't be doing. She had heard that tone before when her mother's ex-boyfriend used to make phone calls late at night, speaking in whispers about money and debts and things that made her mother cry. The conference room doors opened with a soft whoosh of air. Emma peered around the corner of her alcove, curiosity overcoming her desire to remain invisible. Through the glass walls, she could see the two men moving around the polished table, their movements quick and practiced. The room's recessed lighting cast long shadows that danced across the walls as they worked. Daniel Pierce had retrieved the red-striped folder from somewhere inside the conference room. He placed it on the table next to an identical folder that Trevor Banks had produced from his briefcase. Emma watched, fascinated despite herself, as the two men opened both folders simultaneously. Papers rustled softly, and she could see them examining documents with the intensity of surgeons performing a delicate operation. Then something strange happened. The men began switching papers between the folders, moving documents from one red-striped cover to the other with methodical precision. Trevor Banks held up a sheet of paper to the light, checking something carefully before sliding it into the folder that Daniel Pierce held open. They worked in silence now, their earlier conversation replaced by focused concentration. Emma's mother had always taught her to pay attention to details, to notice when things weren't quite right. Truth has a way of showing itself, Grace would say, if you're watching carefully enough. Something about the men's movements felt wrong to Emma, secretive in a way that made her stomach tight with unease. The paper switching continued for several minutes. Emma counted 17 documents being moved from one folder to the other, though she couldn't see what was written on them from her position in the hallway. The men worked with the efficiency of people who had done this before, checking and double-checking each transfer before moving to the next document. When they finished, both folders looked identical again, both bearing the same red stripe across their covers. But Emma knew something fundamental had changed, even if she couldn't understand exactly what. The men closed the folders and stood back, exchanging a look that spoke of completed business and shared secrets. Trevor Banks picked up one of the folders and tucked it under his arm. Daniel Pierce gathered the other papers into the remaining folder, then walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the room. Emma watched him open the bottom drawer and place the folder inside, his movements careful and deliberate. They left the conference room together, pulling the doors closed behind them. As they passed Emma's corner, she heard Trevor Banks speak in a low voice. "Richardson will never know the difference. The quarterly numbers will look exactly like he expects them to." Daniel Pierce nodded grimly. $9 billion in adjusted assets. The pension fund acquisition goes through tomorrow morning, and by the time anyone realizes what's happened, we'll be in Switzerland with our accounts safely transferred. The words meant nothing to Emma, but the tone sent chills through her small body. These men were stealing something. She was certain of it now. Her mother had taught her that stealing was wrong, whether it was taking a cookie from the kitchen counter or something much bigger. The weight of what she had witnessed pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. The men's footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving Emma alone with her racing heart and the terrible knowledge of what she had seen. She looked toward her mother, who was still working 3 offices away, completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded just yards from where her daughter sat. Emma's hands shook as she closed her coloring book. The butterfly she had been working on remained half-finished, its wings only partially filled with the bright yellow crayon she had been using. Everything felt different now, as if the air itself had changed texture. becoming thicker and harder to breathe. The elevator chimed softly at the end of the hallway, and Emma heard footsteps approaching. Heavy footsteps that walked with authority and purpose, different from the quick, secretive steps of the two men who had just left. She peered around the corner again and saw a tall man in an expensive gray suit walking toward the conference room. William Richardson. Emma had heard her mother mention his name countless times, always with a mixture of respect and fear. He was the boss of all the bosses, the man whose name was on the building, whose decisions affected every person who worked within these glass walls. Emma had never seen him this close before, and she was surprised by how tired he looked, despite his perfectly tailored suit and confident stride. Richardson stopped at the conference room doors and pressed his key card against the electronic lock. The doors slid open with a soft whisper, and he disappeared inside. Through the glass walls, Emma could see him moving to the head of the massive table, where several folders lay scattered across the polished surface. He picked up documents and began reading, his brow furrowed in concentration. Emma watched him work, noting how he rubbed his temples occasionally, as if fighting off a headache. There was something lonely about the way he sat in that enormous room, surrounded by empty chairs and the weight of decisions that affected thousands of people. After several minutes, Richardson stood and walked to the filing cabinet where Daniel Pierce had placed the switched folder. He opened the bottom drawer and retrieved the red-striped folder, carrying it back to the table with the careful handling of someone dealing with something extremely important. Emma's stomach clenched as she watched him open the folder and begin examining the documents inside. These were the wrong papers, the switched documents that Trevor Banks and Daniel Pierce had left behind. Richardson had no idea that what he was reading had been deliberately altered to deceive him. The little girl found herself caught in an impossible situation. She had witnessed something terrible, something that her 5-year-old mind understood was deeply wrong, even if she couldn't grasp all the details. The two men in expensive suits had stolen something from the man who owned the building, and now that man was making important decisions based on lies. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Emma, you must always tell the truth, even when it's scary, even when it's hard. Truth is the most important thing we have, and sometimes we're the only ones who can speak it." But how could she tell the truth when she was just a little girl sitting in a corner? How could someone as small and invisible as her possibly matter to someone as powerful as William Richardson? The very idea of speaking to him made her hands sweat, and her heart pound so hard she could hear it in her ears. Richardson continued reading the doctored documents, occasionally making notes in the margins with an expensive-looking pen. Emma could see his expression growing more serious with each page he turned, and she realized that the lies contained in those papers were already beginning to work their poison. Time stretched endlessly as Emma wrestled with her conscience. The hallway felt colder now, and the city lights outside seemed dimmer, as if the weight of the secret she carried was affecting the very world around her. She thought about the pension fund that Daniel Pierce had mentioned, though she didn't understand what it meant. She thought about the $9 billion, a number so large it might as well have been infinity to her young mind. Most of all, she thought about her mother's teachings about right and wrong, about speaking truth even when it was frightening, about standing up for what was good even when you felt small and powerless. The sound of Richardson's chair scraping against the floor snapped Emma back to the present moment. He was gathering the documents, preparing to leave the conference room with the false information that would guide whatever important decision he was about to make. In minutes, he would be gone, and the moment for speaking truth would pass forever. Emma stood on unsteady legs, her coloring book falling forgotten to the marble floor. Her bright yellow dress felt suddenly too visible, too bold for someone who had spent her life trying to be invisible. But her mother's voice spoke louder than her fear, reminding her that sometimes the smallest person in the room carried the most important message. She took one step toward the conference room, then another, each movement requiring enormous courage for her 5-year-old frame. Through the glass walls, she could see Richardson closing the folder and reaching for his briefcase. In seconds, he would leave with the lies that Trevor Banks and Daniel Pierce had so carefully planted. The weight of truth pressed against Emma's chest like a living thing, demanding to be spoken, demanding to be heard. Her mother had always said that truth had its own power, its own urgency, and Emma could feel that power building inside her small body like a storm preparing to break. Richardson was moving toward the conference room doors now, the doctored folder tucked securely under his arm. Emma's window of opportunity was closing with each step he took, and she realized that if she was going to speak, it had to be now, before courage abandoned her entirely. "Mr. Richardson?" The words tore from Emma's throat, like a dam bursting, small and sharp in the vast corporate silence. William Richardson froze mid-stride, his hand still reaching for the conference room door handle. The folder containing the altered documents seemed to grow heavier under his arm as he turned, his steel-gray eyes scanning the empty hallway until they landed on the tiny figure pressed against the glass wall. Emma stood there, trembling, her yellow dress a splash of sunshine against the cold corporate backdrop, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. The courage that had carried her this far wavered under Richardson's penetrating stare, but the weight of truth inside her chest demanded release. I saw them," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the cavernous space. Richardson's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching concern as he noticed the child's obvious distress. He glanced around the empty hallway, then back at Emma, his business instincts warring with an unexpected surge of paternal concern. "Little girl, where are your parents? You shouldn't be here alone." Emma's chin trembled, but she took a step forward. "My mama. She's cleaning. She doesn't know I'm here." The words came in rushed bursts, as if she feared losing her nerve. "But I saw them, Mr. Richardson. I saw what they did to your folder." The mention of the folder made Richardson's entire body go rigid. His grip tightened on the red-striped document case, and his eyes sharpened with sudden intensity. "What did you say?" The change in his tone made Emma shrink back slightly, but she pressed on, the memory of her mother's words echoing in her mind. "Always tell the truth, baby, even when it's scary. The two men, they switched your papers. They took out the real ones and put in different ones." Richardson's face went ashen. He set his briefcase down with deliberate care and crouched to Emma's eye level, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "What men? When did this happen?" "Just now," Emma said, her small voice growing stronger as she saw she had his attention. "Mr. Banks and the other man with the gray tie. They thought nobody was watching, but I was sitting right there." She pointed toward the alcove where her mother's cleaning cart stood abandoned. Richardson's jaw clenched as the implications crashed over him. Trevor Banks and Daniel Pierce, two of his most trusted executives. The merger documents he was about to sign, worth billions, suddenly felt radioactive in his hands. "Emma!" The voice came from behind them, sharp with panic. Grace Harper rounded the corner at a near run, her cleaning uniform wrinkled from rushing, her face pale with terror, at finding her daughter confronting the most powerful man in the building. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Richardson," Grace gasped, reaching for Emma's hand. "She wasn't supposed to. Emma, come here right now." But Richardson held up a hand, stopping Grace mid-apology. His eyes remained fixed on Emma, and there was something in his expression that made Grace's protests die in her throat. "Wait," he said quietly. "Your daughter was just telling me something very important." Emma looked between her mother and Richardson, drawing strength from both their presence and the truth burning inside her. "Mama taught me to always tell the truth," she said. her voice clearer now. "Even when people might not believe me because I'm little." Richardson felt something crack inside his chest at those words. Here was this child, this tiny person who should have been invisible in his corporate world, displaying more integrity than executives with decades of experience. "I believe you, Emma," he said softly. "Can you tell me exactly what you saw?" Emma nodded solemnly, and in halting but precise detail, she recounted the scene she'd witnessed. How Trevor Banks had checked the hallway twice before opening the red folder. How Daniel Pierce had pulled papers from his briefcase. How they'd swapped documents with practiced efficiency. Their voices too low for her to hear, but their movements urgent and secretive. With each word Emma spoke, Richardson's expression grew darker. The merger with Hartwell Industries, the deal that would cement Richardson Global's dominance in the energy sector, had been Trevor's project from the beginning. Daniel Pierce had been handling the financial projections. If they were manipulating the documents. "Stay here," Richardson commanded, his voice carrying the steel that had built his empire. He pulled out his phone and dialed his head of security. "Marcus, I need you in conference room A immediately. Bring your team. We have a situation." Grace clutched Emma's shoulders, her knuckles white. "Mr. Richardson," I swear she wasn't snooping. She was just Mrs. Harper. Richardson's voice cut through her apologies like a blade. "Your daughter may have just saved my company from a catastrophic fraud." He looked down at Emma, and for the first time in years, William Richardson saw something in another person's eyes that reminded him why he'd started building his empire in the first place. Not for power or wealth, but to create something meaningful. "Emma, I need you to be very brave for just a little while longer." "Can you do that?" Emma nodded, though her small body continued to tremble. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hallway as Marcus Chen, Richardson's head of security, arrived with 2 additional officers. Marcus had been with Richardson for 15 years, and he recognized the particular set of his boss's shoulders that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Sir?" Marcus asked, his eyes taking in the scene. Richardson holding the merger folder like it might explode, a cleaning lady and her small daughter pressed against the wall, and tension in the air thick enough to cut. "I need you to locate Trevor Banks and Daniel Pierce immediately," Richardson said, his voice deadly quiet. "Detain them for questioning, and I need a complete forensic analysis of these documents." He held up the red folder. "I have reason to believe they've been tampered with." Marcus nodded crisply. "Yes, sir. Should I contact legal?" "Not yet." Richardson's eyes flicked to Emma, then back to Marcus. "First, I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. And, Marcus, handle this discreetly, if word gets out before we have all the facts." "Understood, sir." As Marcus and his team hurried away, Richardson found himself alone with Grace and Emma once again. The hallway that had seemed so familiar just minutes ago now felt transformed, charged with the possibility of betrayal and the unexpected presence of genuine courage from the most unlikely source. "Mr. Richardson," Grace said hesitantly, "Emma and I should go. I don't want to cause any more trouble." "No." The word came out sharper than Richardson intended, and he saw both mother and daughter flinch. He softened his tone. "Please, I may need Emma to verify what she saw. And Mrs. Harper. How long have you worked for Richardson Global?" Grace's cheeks flushed. 3 years, sir. Night cleaning crew. 3 years." Richardson repeated the words as if they held some hidden meaning. "And in all that time, how many executives have asked your name?" The question caught Grace off guard. She glanced around nervously, as if the walls might provide an answer. Well, it's not really. We're supposed to stay invisible, Mr. Richardson. That's how cleaning works. Invisible." Richardson tasted the word and found it bitter. Here was a woman who had raised a daughter with more moral clarity than his own board of directors, and she considered herself invisible. What's your full name? Grace Harper, sir. Grace Harper. He extended his hand formally. Thank you for raising a daughter brave enough to speak truth to power. Grace stared at his outstretched hand as if it might be a trap, then slowly reached out to shake it. Her palm was rough from work, real work, the kind Richardson hadn't done with his own hands in decades. The elevator chimed, and Marcus emerged with Trevor Banks in tow. Trevor's usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive tie askew, and his face carried the particular pallor of a man whose carefully laid plans were unraveling in real time. "William," Trevor said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Marcus said you needed to see me urgently. Is everything all right with the Hartwell deal?" Richardson studied his longtime colleague with new eyes. 20 years of partnership, of shared victories and mutual trust, and it might all have been built on quicksand. "That depends, Trevor. Is there anything about the Hartwell merger you'd like to tell me?" Trevor's smile flickered. "I'm not sure what you mean. Everything's proceeded exactly as planned. The documents are ready for your signature." "These documents?" Richardson held up the red folder, and Trevor's eyes locked onto it with unmistakable recognition and growing panic. "Yes, those are the final merger agreements. William, why don't we step into your office and—" "Where's Daniel?" The abrupt question made Trevor stumble mid-sentence. "Daniel? I assume he's in his office? Why would I know where—" "Because 15 minutes ago, he was here with you, switching out the contents of this folder." The words hit Trevor like physical blows. His face went white, then red, then white again as his eyes darted around the hallway, finally landing on Emma. For the first time, he truly saw her, this small witness to his betrayal, and Richardson watched as the recognition dawned in Trevor's eyes. "A 5-year-old child," Richardson said, his voice carrying decades of accumulated authority. "That's who caught you, Trevor. A little girl who was taught that telling the truth matters more than staying invisible." Trevor's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. "William, you don't understand. The Hartwell deal. It's not what it seems. The environmental impact reports, the long-term projections. If you knew what I knew, you'd understand why we had to adjust the numbers." "Adjust the numbers?" Richardson's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "You committed fraud, Trevor. Corporate fraud worth billions of dollars. I was protecting the company." Trevor's composure shattered completely. "Hartwell Industries is sitting on environmental liabilities that would bankrupt us within 5 years. The cleanup costs alone would exceed the merger value. I was trying to save Richardson Global by lying to me, by making the hard choices you were too principled to make." The admission hung in the air like a poison cloud. Emma pressed closer to her mother, sensing the adult emotions swirling around her without fully understanding their implications. Grace wrapped her arms around her daughter, creating a small island of protection in the storm of corporate betrayal. Richardson looked at Trevor Banks, this man he'd trusted with his company's future, and felt something die inside his chest. Not his faith in business or success, but something deeper. His faith in the idea that power and principle could coexist, that the empire he'd built meant something more than just accumulated wealth. 20 years, Trevor. 20 years of partnership. And you thought so little of me that you believed I couldn't handle the truth. The truth? Trevor laughed bitterly. The truth is that business at this level requires compromises you've always been too naive to make. That's why you needed people like me and Daniel, to do what you couldn't do yourself. What I wouldn't do myself. The correction was quiet, but absolute, and Trevor seemed to understand that he'd crossed a line from which there was no return. Marcus reappeared with Daniel Pierce, whose defeat was written across every line of his body. Unlike Trevor's defiant desperation, Daniel had the hollow look of a man who'd already accepted his fate. "Daniel," Richardson said, his voice heavy with disappointment. 20 years. Daniel nodded miserably. "I know, William. I know what we've cost you. What we've cost everyone." "The original documents," Richardson continued. "Where are they?" Daniel reached into his briefcase with shaking hands and withdrew a manila envelope. "Everything's here. The real environmental reports, the actual financial projections, the true liability assessments." Richardson took the envelope, but didn't open it. Instead, he looked down at Emma, who had watched this entire confrontation with wide, unblinking eyes. "Emma, when you saw these men switch the papers, were you scared?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Very scared. But you told me anyway. Why?" Emma's answer came without hesitation, in the clear voice of a child who had been raised to understand that some things mattered more than fear. "Because Mama says the truth helps people, even when it's hard to say." Richardson felt something shift inside him, like tectonic plates finding a new arrangement after an earthquake. He looked at Trevor and Daniel, two men who had chosen deception over difficulty, and then at Emma and Grace, who had chosen courage over comfort. "Marcus," he said quietly, "please escort Mr. Banks and Mr. Pierce to security holding. Contact our legal team and the appropriate authorities. Mrs. Harper, Emma, would you please come with me to my office? I believe we have some things to discuss." As they walked toward the elevator, Emma's small hand slipped into Richardson's large one, and for the first time in years, William Richardson felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The folder of lies felt weightless now, but the burden of truth Emma had given him felt like the most valuable thing he'd ever carried. The elevator doors closed with a soft whisper, sealing them in a cocoon of polished steel and muted lighting. William Richardson found himself studying the reflection of the three figures beside him. A small girl in a bright yellow dress clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit. A woman in a simple blue uniform with worry etched in every line of her face. And himself, a man who looked somehow different than he had that morning, though he couldn't quite pinpoint why. Emma's hand remained in his, surprisingly steady for someone so small. Grace Harper stood rigidly against the far wall, her cleaning supplies forgotten in the hallway below, her eyes darting between her daughter and the most powerful man she'd ever encountered. "Emma," William said softly as they ascended toward the executive floor, "you did something very brave today. Do you understand what you saw?" The little girl looked up at him with those impossibly clear brown eyes. "They were being sneaky," she said simply. "Mama always says being sneaky is wrong, especially when it hurts people." Grace's breath caught audibly. "Emma, sweetheart, maybe we should—" "No," William interrupted gently, then caught himself. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harper. I didn't mean to overstep. But Emma is absolutely right. They were being sneaky, and it would have hurt a lot of people." The elevator chimed softly as they reached the 52nd floor, the executive level that most employees never saw. The doors opened to reveal a world of marble floors, original artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the Chicago skyline. Emma's eyes widened as they stepped out. "It's like a castle," she whispered. "It is, isn't it?" William realized he was seeing his own workplace through her eyes for the first time in years. The opulence that had once filled him with pride now felt excessive, almost obscene, when he considered that Grace worked 3 jobs to make ends meet while he surrounded himself with Italian marble and hand-carved woodwork. His office door bore his name in gold lettering, William J. Richardson, Chief Executive Officer. Inside, the space was a monument to success. Awards lined the walls, degrees from prestigious universities hung in matching frames, and a massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room like an altar to corporate power. Grace hesitated at the threshold, her worn shoes silent on the thick Persian carpet. "Mr. Richardson, I don't think we should—" "Please," he said, and the word carried a weight of genuine invitation rather than polite obligation. "Please, both of you, sit down." He guided them to the leather chairs facing his desk, then surprised himself by walking around to sit in one of the remaining chairs, rather than positioning himself behind the imposing barrier of his desk. Emma climbed up into the oversized chair, her small frame nearly disappearing into the buttery leather, while Grace perched on the edge of hers, as if ready to bolt at any moment. "Mrs. Harper," William began, then paused, realizing he'd never actually spoken her first name aloud. "Grace. May I call you Grace?" She nodded mutely, clutching her hands in her lap. "Grace, I need to apologize to you, not just for today, but for every day. I've walked past you in these halls for— How long have you worked here?" 3 years, she whispered. 3 years. And I never once stopped to say hello, never once asked your name, or acknowledged that you're the reason this place is clean and professional and ready for business every morning at 7 a.m. sharp. He leaned forward, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "That's not just rude, Grace. It's shameful." Emma had been listening intently, her head swiveling between the adults like she was watching a tennis match. Now she spoke up with the blunt honesty that only children possess. "Mama cries sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping. She says she feels invisible." The words hit William like a physical blow. Grace's face flushed red with embarrassment, but she didn't deny her daughter's statement. "Emma," Grace started, but William held up a gentle hand. "No, she's right to say it. And you're right to feel invisible, Grace, because that's exactly how I've treated you. How I've treated all of our employees who aren't sitting in executive meetings or wearing expensive suits." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that would have seemed impossibly informal to anyone who knew the usually composed CEO. "Do you know what I was thinking about when I walked past you in that hallway today? I was thinking about quarterly projections, about market share, about impressing investors I'll never see again with numbers that won't matter in 5 years. He stood and walked to the massive window behind his desk, gazing out at the city sprawling below. "Meanwhile, your 5-year-old daughter was doing something I should have been doing all along. She was paying attention. She was watching out for what's right." Emma slipped down from her chair and approached him with the fearless curiosity of childhood. She stood beside him at the window, pressing her small hands against the glass. "It's really high up here," she observed. "Do you ever feel lonely?" The question was so unexpected, so piercingly direct, that William felt his breath catch. When had he last been asked how he felt about anything that wasn't related to business? When had anyone cared enough to wonder? "Yes," he said quietly, and the admission surprised him with its honesty. "I do feel lonely sometimes, Emma. I think I've been lonely for a very long time without realizing it." Grace was watching them from her chair, her expression shifting from fear to something that might have been understanding. "Mr. Richardson," she said softly, "you don't need to—" "I do need to," he interrupted, turning back to face both of them. "I absolutely do need to. Emma, what you did today saved this company. Not just the money, though that's important too. You saved the jobs of every person who works here. You saved the retirement funds of thousands of people who invested in us because they trusted us to do the right thing." He walked back to his chair, but instead of sitting, he knelt down so he was at Emma's eye level. "But more than that, you saved me from becoming someone I never wanted to be. Someone who was so focused on numbers and profits that he forgot about people entirely." Emma studied his face with the intensity that children bring to important moments. "Are you going to fire my mama?" "What? No! Emma, why would you think that?" "Because I told on the sneaky men, and maybe you don't want sneaky people getting caught." The logic was so purely childlike, yet so devastatingly accurate about how many corporations actually operated that William felt something fundamental shift in his chest. Here was this little girl, worried that her honesty might cost her mother the job they desperately needed, and she'd spoken up anyway, because it was the right thing to do. "Emma Harper," he said solemnly, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. Your mama is not going to lose her job. In fact, I'm going to make sure she never has to worry about losing her job again, as long as she wants to work here. And you know why?" Emma shook her head. "Because you and your mama are exactly the kind of people this company needs. People who tell the truth, even when it's scary. People who do what's right, even when it's hard." He stood and moved to his desk, picking up his phone. "Margaret?" "Yes, I know it's late. I need you to arrange a full scholarship to Thornfield Academy for Emma Harper. Yes, the private school. Full tuition, books, everything. And I want it to start immediately." He paused, listening to his assistant's response. "No, Margaret, this isn't negotiable. This little girl just saved our company, and her education is the least we can do." Grace gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mr. Richardson, we can't accept—" "Grace." His voice was firm but kind. "You've been working 3 jobs to give Emma a better life. I've seen your employment application. You graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a degree in business administration, but you're cleaning offices because it's the only job that lets you be home when Emma gets out of school." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She'd worked so hard to keep that information private, to maintain some dignity despite her circumstances. "Starting Monday, you're going to be Richardson Global's new Director of Employee Relations. Your job will be to make sure that no one else ever feels invisible in this company. That every employee, from the newest intern to the most senior executive, feels seen and valued and heard." I don't understand," Grace whispered. "It's simple. You're going to help me transform this place into the kind of company that Emma would be proud to see her mother work for. A company where a 5-year-old girl's honesty isn't unusual because honesty is what we expect from everyone, including ourselves." Emma had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention of a child who understands that something important is happening, even if she doesn't grasp all the details. Now she tugged on William's sleeve. "Mr. Richardson, are you going to be sad about the sneaky men?" He knelt down again, meeting her eyes. "You know what, Emma? I thought I would be. They were my friends, or at least I thought they were. But I'm not sad about them being gone. I'm sad that I didn't see what kind of people they really were. And I'm sad that it took a 5-year-old girl to teach me how to pay attention to what really matters." Over the next several hours, the 52nd floor of Richardson Global became the center of a carefully orchestrated response to the attempted fraud. Legal teams arrived with briefcases and serious expressions. FBI agents in dark suits interviewed William, Emma, and Grace separately, their questions precise and thorough. The media, somehow alerted to the dramatic arrests, had begun gathering in the lobby, their cameras and questions creating a buzz of anticipation throughout the building. But in his office, as the sun began to set over Chicago, William found himself focused not on the crisis management or the legal implications or the potential media fallout. Instead, he was watching Emma color in a coloring book that his assistant had found somewhere in the building, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she carefully stayed within the lines. Grace sat beside her daughter, no longer perched on the edge of her chair, but settled back into the leather with something that looked almost like comfort. She'd changed out of her cleaning uniform into a simple dress from the executive floor's emergency wardrobe. And the transformation was remarkable not just in her appearance, but in the way she carried herself. "Grace," William said during a quiet moment, between phone calls and legal consultations, "can I ask you something personal?" She nodded, though wariness flickered in her eyes. When you were working toward your degree, what did you want to do? What were your dreams before? Before life got complicated? Grace was quiet for so long that he wondered if she would answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, with old longing. I wanted to make a difference. I know that sounds naive, but I genuinely thought I could help create workplaces where people felt valued, where success wasn't just about profits, but about building something meaningful. That doesn't sound naive at all, William replied. It sounds exactly like what this company needs. Sifu, as evening deepened into night, the legal teams finished their initial interviews and departed with promises to continue their investigation in the morning. The FBI agents left with boxes of evidence and stern warnings about the ongoing nature of their inquiry. The media, denied access to the principals, eventually dispersed with promises to return with the dawn. Finally, it was just the three of them again in the vast office, surrounded by the detritus of a day that had changed everything. Emma had fallen asleep in her chair, her coloring book sliding from her lap, her stuffed rabbit clutched securely to her chest. "She's exhausted," Grace whispered, smoothing her daughter's hair with infinite tenderness. "So are you," William observed. "Both of you have been incredibly brave today." Grace looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Mr. Richardson, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. Is this real? The job offer? The scholarship? All of it? Or is this gratitude that's going to fade when the shock wears off?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with years of disappointment and broken promises from a world that had consistently undervalued Grace Harper and her daughter. William considered his answer carefully, knowing that his response would set the tone for everything that followed. "Grace, 6 months ago, if someone had told me that the most important conversation of my career would happen with a cleaning lady and her 5-year-old daughter, I would have thought they were crazy. 6 months ago, I measured success by stock prices and quarterly earnings and how many hours I could work without sleeping." He gestured toward the window where the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars. "This morning, I walked past your daughter in that hallway without seeing her. Tonight, she's asleep in my office after saving my company and teaching me something about courage that I should have learned decades ago." He moved to his desk and pulled out a leather portfolio, extracting several documents that he'd had prepared during the evening's legal consultations. "This is Emma's scholarship agreement, full tuition at Thornfield Academy through high school graduation, with provisions for college if she chooses to pursue higher education. And this," he handed Grace a second set of papers, "is your employment contract as Director of Employee Relations, with a salary that's considerably more than you made in all 3 of your jobs combined." Grace stared at the documents, her hands trembling slightly as she read the terms. "This is too much. We don't deserve—" "Stop." William's voice was gentle but firm. "Don't you dare say you don't deserve this. You've been working 3 jobs to keep your daughter fed and housed and loved while earning a fraction of what you're worth." Emma had the courage to speak up when grown men with decades of experience would have stayed silent. "If anyone doesn't deserve what they've been given, it's me." He sat down across from her, his voice growing more reflective. "I inherited this company from my father, who built it from nothing. He started with a small accounting firm and grew it into what you see today through hard work and determination and, yes, some ruthless business decisions. But somewhere along the way, I think we both lost sight of why we were building it in the first place." Grace looked up from the contracts. "Why were you building it? To create something that mattered, to provide good jobs for people who wanted to work hard and contribute something meaningful. To build wealth, yes, but wealth that served a purpose beyond just accumulating more wealth." Emma stirred in her chair, mumbling something in her sleep about sneaky folders. and both adults smiled despite themselves. "She's going to remember this day for the rest of her life," Grace said softly. "So am I," William replied. "And I want to make sure she remembers it as the day she learned that speaking the truth, even when it's difficult, is always the right choice. Not as the day she learned that the world is too dangerous for honest people." Grace carefully placed the contracts on the side table and leaned back in her chair, studying William with new eyes. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone colder, I guess. More removed from people like us." "I was colder," William admitted. "I was exactly what you expected, until about 8 hours ago. Your daughter changed that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Emma sleep. Outside, the city continued its restless pulse, but inside the executive office, something approaching peace had settled over the unlikely trio. "What happens now?" Grace asked eventually. William smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt completely genuine. "Now we get to work. You're going to help me figure out how to run a company that actually deserves employees like you. Employees who tell the truth, who care about more than just their paychecks, who understand that success means building something together rather than climbing over each other to reach the top." "And Emma?" "Emma gets to be a kid. She gets to go to school and make friends and learn that the world, despite everything, is still a place where doing the right thing matters." Grace nodded, tears threatening again, but they were different tears now. Not the tears of exhaustion and worry that had become her constant companion, but tears of something that felt dangerously close to hope. As if sensing the shift in emotional atmosphere, Emma began to wake up, blinking sleepily and looking around the unfamiliar office with momentary confusion. "Mama," she said, in the small voice of a tired child. "I'm here, sweetheart," Grace said, moving to gather her daughter into her arms. "Everything's okay." Emma looked over Grace's shoulder at William, her expression serious despite her sleepy state. "Mr. Richardson, did we do good today?" "Emma Harper," William said solemnly, "you did more than good. You did something extraordinary. You told the truth when it mattered most, and you changed everything." Emma considered this with the gravity that children bring to important pronouncements. "Good," she said finally, settling more securely into her mother's embrace. "Mama says telling the truth is always right, even when it's scary." "Your mama is absolutely correct," William replied, "and I think it's time we all went home. It's been a very long day, and tomorrow we start building something new." As they gathered their things and prepared to leave the office, William found himself looking around the space with different eyes. The awards and degrees and expensive furnishings that had once represented his achievements now seemed less like trophies and more like reminders of a person he was ready to stop being. The real trophy was walking beside him toward the elevator, a 5-year-old girl in a wrinkled yellow dress who had saved his company not through clever strategy or financial manipulation, but through simple, honest observation. And her mother, who had raised that child to value truth above safety, courage above comfort. As the elevator doors closed on the three of them once again, William realized that this was not the end of the crisis, but the beginning of something entirely new. Tomorrow, he would have to face his board of directors, the media, the employees who were just now learning that their jobs had been saved by the daughter of a cleaning lady. Tomorrow, he would have to prove that the changes he promised tonight were more than just words spoken in the emotional aftermath of a dramatic day. But for now, in the quiet descent from the 52nd floor to the ground level where Grace's old car waited in the employee parking garage, William Richardson felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The deep satisfaction of knowing he was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The folder full of lies was now evidence in an FBI investigation. The two men who had betrayed his trust were spending the night in federal holding cells, and the little girl who had exposed it all was falling asleep again in her mother's arms, secure in the knowledge that sometimes, when you tell the truth, adults actually listen. 6 months later, the 52nd floor of Richardson Global looked nothing like the sterile corporate wasteland William had once ruled from behind closed doors. The glass walls that had once separated him from his employees had been replaced with open spaces where people gathered around coffee stations, sharing stories and solutions. The executive dining room had become a community kitchen, where everyone from janitors to vice presidents ate together. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had happened completely. William stood at the window of his redesigned office, watching the Chicago skyline as afternoon sunlight painted the glass towers gold. His reflection stared back at him, but the man in the glass looked different now. The sharp edges had softened. The permanent furrow between his eyebrows had smoothed. He still wore expensive suits, but somehow they fit differently on a man who had learned to see beyond the bottom line. A gentle knock on his door frame drew his attention. Grace Harper stood there, no longer in a cleaning uniform, but in a crisp business suit that marked her new role as Director of Employee Relations. The transformation in her appearance was striking, but the real change was in how she carried herself. The apologetic hunch was gone, replaced by the confident posture of a woman who had finally found her voice and her worth. "The park is ready," she said, and her smile carried the same warmth it always had, but now it reached all the way to her eyes. "Emma's been asking every 5 minutes if it's time to go yet." William chuckled, a sound that had become more frequent these days. "Where is she?" "Organizing the other kids in the daycare center. She's appointed herself the official party coordinator." Grace's expression grew thoughtful. "She's different now, you know. More confident. But she's still the same little girl who told you the truth that night. That part of her will never change." The daycare center had been one of William's first initiatives, built right there on the 15th floor so employees could see their children during lunch breaks and after school hours. It had seemed like a radical idea at the time, but watching parents light up when they caught glimpses of their kids throughout the day had convinced him that some radical ideas were exactly what the world needed. They walked together toward the elevator, past cubicles that now had family photos and personal touches, past conference rooms with glass doors that stayed open unless privacy was absolutely necessary, past bulletin boards covered with employee suggestions and company responses. The building hummed with a different kind of energy now, the sound of people who felt valued creating something meaningful together. The elevator ride down gave William a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them here. The FBI investigation had concluded 3 months ago with Trevor Banks and Daniel Pierce receiving federal prison sentences for corporate fraud. The media attention had been intense for weeks, with reporters fascinated by the story of a 5-year-old whistleblower who had saved thousands of jobs. But through it all, William had kept his focus on the promise he had made that first night in this very elevator. The board of directors had initially resisted his proposed changes, arguing that employee satisfaction programs and community initiatives would hurt profitability. But William had shown them something more powerful than quarterly projections. He had shown them what happened when people felt genuinely valued. Productivity had increased 23%. Employee turnover had dropped to almost zero. Customer satisfaction had reached all-time highs. The bottom line hadn't suffered. It had flourished in ways that no amount of cost-cutting could have achieved. The elevator opened onto the ground floor, where William could see through the glass lobby to the park across the street. Richardson Global had purchased the small green space 6 months ago and transformed it into a community gathering place, complete with playgrounds, picnic areas, and a small stage where local musicians performed on summer evenings. Today, it was decorated with balloons and streamers for the company's first annual Family Appreciation Day. As they crossed the street, William spotted Emma immediately. She was standing on a picnic table, her bright yellow dress making her look like a small sunflower, directing a group of older children in the setup of what appeared to be an elaborate game involving hula hoops and sidewalk chalk. Her voice carried across the park with the same clear confidence that had stopped him in his tracks that November evening. "No, Tommy, the blue circle goes there because that's where the truth starts," she was explaining to a boy twice her age, who was nodding seriously as if receiving instructions for a military operation. "And remember, you can't jump to the red circle unless you tell everyone something true about yourself first." William found himself smiling. Even at 5.5, Emma had managed to turn a simple children's game into a lesson about honesty and courage. Some things, he thought, were simply part of who a person was, regardless of age. The park filled quickly as employees and their families arrived. William watched department heads pushing their children on swings while discussing quarterly projections. He saw security guards teaching teenagers how to throw a football while their parents shared stories on nearby benches. The artificial barriers that had once divided his workforce into rigid hierarchies had dissolved into something organic and real. Sarah Chen, who had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer after demonstrating her ability to see solutions that others missed, appeared at his elbow with a clipboard and a grin. "The hot dog vendor is here, the face painting station is operational, and Emma has successfully recruited 17 children for her Truth Circle game. I'd say we're officially ready to party." "Truth Circle?" William asked, though he thought he could guess. "It's her invention. Kids stand in a circle and take turns sharing something honest about themselves. Simple things, mostly. I'm scared of spiders. I wish I was taller. I love my grandma more than ice cream. But watching them, you can see how powerful it is. They're connecting with each other in a way that most adults never do." William nodded, understanding completely. In the months since that November night, he had learned that Emma's gift wasn't just her willingness to tell the truth. It was her ability to create spaces where truth felt safe, where honesty became a bridge between people instead of a weapon used against them. The afternoon unfolded with the easy joy of a community that had found its rhythm. William moved through the crowd not as a distant CEO making obligatory appearances, but as someone who belonged. He helped serve hamburgers at the grill station. He judged a chalk art competition with the gravity of someone evaluating masterpieces. He listened to an elderly security guard tell stories about his grandchildren with the same attention he once reserved for merger proposals. As the sun began to set, painting the park in shades of amber and rose, Emma climbed back onto her picnic table and called for everyone's attention. The crowd gathered around her, hundreds of people forming a loose circle around the small girl who had changed all their lives. "I want to tell you all something true," she announced, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the gathering. "When I was little." She paused, considering this, and the crowd chuckled gently. "When I was littler, I thought that telling the truth was just about not lying. But now I know it's more than that. It's about helping people see things they couldn't see before. It's about making sure nobody stays invisible." She looked directly at William then, and he felt that same jolt of recognition he had experienced 6 months ago in the hallway outside his office. "Mr. Richardson taught me that when you tell the truth, you're not just helping yourself, you're helping everyone. And when everyone helps everyone, everything gets better." The applause that followed was warm and genuine, but Emma wasn't finished. "So, I want everyone to find someone they don't usually talk to and tell them one true thing about themselves, something that will help them see you better." What happened next was something William would remember for the rest of his life. The crowd didn't disperse or make polite conversation. They actually did what Emma suggested. He watched a senior accountant approach a maintenance worker and share that she had always wanted to learn to paint. He saw a young programmer tell a veteran secretary that he was terrified of making mistakes, but inspired by her confidence. He observed a cleaning lady and a vice president discovering they both had daughters the same age and similar dreams. Grace appeared beside him, no longer the invisible woman who had once cleaned his office, but the confident professional who had become one of his most trusted advisors. "She's remarkable, isn't she?" "She gets it from her mother," William replied, and meant it completely. "No," Grace said softly, watching her daughter help two shy children introduce themselves to each other. "She gets it from being Emma. But I'm grateful every day that she felt safe enough to speak up that night. Not just because of what it meant for the company, but because of what it taught both of us about our own worth." As the evening wound down and families began gathering their things, William found himself sitting on a bench with Emma, watching the last children finish their games in the twilight. The park was littered with the happy debris of a successful celebration. Balloon fragments caught in tree branches, chalk dust on the sidewalks, forgotten sweaters draped over playground equipment. "Are you happy, Mr. Richardson?" Emma asked, swinging her legs from the bench that was still too high for her feet to touch the ground. The question was so direct, so purely Emma, that William had to think about it seriously. Was he happy? The answer surprised him with its clarity. "Yes," he said, "I am. But it's a different kind of happy than I used to think I wanted." "What kind is it?" "The kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to do, with exactly the people who matter most." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. "That's what my mom calls the good kind of happy, the kind that stays even when things get hard. Your mom is a very wise woman. She says I saved your company, but I think you saved it. I just told you what I saw." "Chose?" William looked down at this extraordinary child who had somehow managed to see past the surface of everything, straight to the heart of what mattered. "Emma, do you know what I've learned from all this?" "What?" "I've learned that the most important truths aren't about numbers or money or success. They're about seeing each other clearly and taking care of each other well. You didn't just tell me what you saw that night. You showed me how to see." Emma smiled, the same radiant expression that had convinced him to trust her testimony 6 months ago. "Good, because there's still lots of stuff that needs fixing in the world. We're going to need everyone to keep seeing and telling the truth." As Grace approached to collect her daughter, and William prepared to say goodnight to his employees, he realized that Emma was absolutely right. The folder full of lies had been just the beginning. The real work, the work of building a world where truth was safe and everyone mattered, where small voices were heard and big hearts made space for everyone, was ongoing. But for the first time in his adult life, William Richardson felt ready for that work. Not because he had all the answers, but because he had learned the most important lesson of all. When you stop trying to be the smartest person in the room and start trying to be the most honest. When you stop asking how much profit you can make and start asking how much good you can do. When you stop seeing employees and start seeing people, the whole world changes. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that change starts with a 5-year-old girl in a bright dress who whispers 5 words that save everything. I saw them switch the folder. The park lights came on as families headed home, illuminating the space where Richardson Global employees had gathered, not as workers serving a corporation, but as a community committed to something larger than themselves. William watched them go, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to choose truth over convenience, people over profits, connection over control. But tonight, as he walked back toward his building alongside Grace and Emma, William Richardson was simply grateful. Grateful for the child who had shown him how to see. Grateful for the mother who had raised her to speak truth with courage. Grateful for the second chance to build something meaningful with the life he had been given. The glass tower that housed Richardson Global still stretched 52 floors into the Chicago sky, but it no longer felt like an ivory tower separating him from the world below. It had become what it was always meant to be, a place where people gathered to create something bigger than themselves, a community built on the radical foundation that everyone matters, everyone has value, and everyone deserves to be seen. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that a 5-year-old girl had taught a billionaire. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room has the most important thing to say. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one everyone needs to hear. Sometimes the truth whispered in fear becomes the courage that changes everything. Emma Harper had saved more than a company that November night. She had saved the soul of every person who learned to listen when she spoke. And in the process, she had reminded them all of the most powerful truth in the world. When we choose to see each other clearly and speak honestly, when we choose connection over isolation and courage over fear, we don't just change our own lives. We change everything.